On the rugged coastline of Aberdeenshire, where the North Sea hurls itself against jagged cliffs, the haunting silhouette of Slane Castle rises into the sky. Roofless and wind-worn, this dramatic ruin is more than a historical curiosity. It is a place where landscape, legend and literature converge to create one of Scotland's most amazing destinations. The front of the castle stands very close to the edge of the cliffs, while its rear, beyond that where once formal gardens, is protected by a deep cleft cutting inland towards the old access road. Inside the castle is a maze of brick-built corridors and nettled-filled chambers. The story of Slane's Castle is the story of the Earls of Erroll, which is a distinguished Scottish noble title created in 1452 by King James II for William Hay, making him the first Earl of Erroll. The title has since been held by the Hay family, who serves as chiefs of the Clan Hay, and held the office of Lord High Constable of Scotland, one of the greatest officers of state. Over the centuries, the Earls of Erroll have played influential roles in Scottish history, supporting monarchs, engaging in religious and political struggles, and maintaining ceremonial importance. What we see today is known as New Slane's Castle, which began in 1597 when Francis Hay, the 9th Earl, built it after his ancestral home, Old Slane's Castle, was destroyed. The original fortress, built in the 1200s, had been the seat of the Erroll family for centuries until 1594, when the Earl backed a rebellion by the Earl of Huntly against King James. The king's response was swift and brutal. He ordered Old Slane's to be blown up, and little of it remains today. Not only was the old castle blown up, but the Earl was exiled to Holland. But in time the Earl's fortunes returned, for he was not in exile for long, and in 1597 he had made peace with the king and returned to Scotland, choosing not to rebuild the old fortress, but instead to expand a tower house which became the foundations of New Slane's Castle. Old Slane Castle is a short distance away. Over the centuries, the stone tower grew into a sprawling residence, complete with courtyards, staircases and grand hall. In the 19th century, the castle was given a granite facelift. As with all buildings, it's the people who lived here that make the stories of the place, and here the castle was closely tied to a turbulent political and religious landscape of the period, serving as a centre for Jacobite sympathies. Several countesses played roles in the Jacobite rising. Lady Catherine took part in the 1689 rising, some saying she arranged for letters to be smuggled in and out of Edinburgh Castle during the siege of 1689. Lady Anne hosted French agents in the early 1700s. Indeed, the castle was discussed as a potential landing site for James Edward Stuart during the planned but ultimately aborted 1708 French Jacobite invasion of Scotland. The Jacobite connection continued with Mary Hay, who actively recruited men for the 1745 rebellion. By 1916, burdened by debt and death duties, the 12th Earl sold the castle, ending more than 300 years of occupation by the family. The new owner stripped the roof in 1925, salvaging just stone for reuse elsewhere. Exposed to the elements, the castle quickly fell into ruin. Today, the wind rustles through the hollow windows, gulls nest in the crumbling walls, and the scent of salt and decay lingers in every corner. It's no surprise that saying castles gathered a reputation for ghostly presence. Visitors speak of phantom footsteps echoing through the corridors, faint candlelight flickering in the windows long since opened to the sky. Local legends tell of a lady in white who wanders the cliffs, believed to be the spirit of a young noblewoman who leapt to her death after her lover was lost at sea. Others claim to hear the sound of carriages arriving in the courtyard at midnight, though no path remains for the wheels to tread. The castle's isolated position, its exposed cliffside, and the mournful cry of seabirds lead themselves to superstitions. On misty nights, the ruin seems to blur into the landscape, half real, half remembered, as though the ghost of its past still clings to the stone. But most people come here due to the connection of Bram Stoker, who wrote a number of novels, but he is mainly known for his Gothic masterpiece, Dracula. He was introduced to Whitby by a good friend in 1890 after he became exhausted from work. It's obvious how impactful Whitby is to the story of Dracula. It is said that he was struck by the ruins of Whitby Abbey, the steep cliffs, the tales of shipwrecks. Here it's believed that Slane's castle, with its eerie grandeur, may have influenced him, where he stayed frequently at a local hotel. It is widely believed that he drew inspiration from this castle while crafting its Gothic masterpiece. The castle's clifftop isolation, the labyrinth layout, and storm-lashed atmosphere mirrored the Count's Transylvanian fortress. Walking around the ruins today, it's easy to imagine Stoker pacing the same windswept cliffs, the sound of waves crushing below, seabirds circling overhead, his imagination stirred by the wild beauty around him. The howling wind, the cold stone, the endless sea together creates a setting where the line between the real and the supernatural begins to blur. Although when he wrote Dracula, the castle wasn't a ruin at that point, but it was still an impressive sight to see against the cliffs. Bram Stoker started to take notes for Dracula when he visited Whitby in 1890. Over years, Stoker conducts extensive research into history, folklore and vampire legends. He compiles more than 100 pages of notes, superstitions and names, developing characters such as Count Dracula. His book, Dracula, was published in 1897. But he was not the only author to visit the area. Dr. Samuel Johnson was a renowned English writer, poet, best known for compiling a dictionary of the English language, which was published in 1755. Although he was not the first person to write a dictionary, his work was most comprehensive and influential of its time. Johnson spent 9 years preparing the dictionary, which contained around 43,000 words and included detailed definitions, quotations and witty commentary. His dictionary greatly contributed to the standardization of English spelling, shaping the study and use of the language for generations. Perhaps one of his most famous definitions is that of oats, which he wrote a grain, which in England generally given to horses, but in Scotland supports the people. Dr. Johnson visited this castle during his famous journey to Scotland in 1773, where he undertook with his close friend James Boswell. Their travels through the Highlands and Islands were later recorded in Johnson's book, A Journey to the Western Islands of Scotland, published in 1775. When Johnson and Boswell visited New Slane Castle, Johnson was struck by both the setting and the hospitality they received. He wrote, "We came somewhat late to New Slane's castle, where the Countess resided. We were received with the usual ceremony, and invited to stay as long as we should be pleased. The house is very spacious, and the situation noble, on the verge of a rock, from which the sea is seen far extended, till the eye wanders over a vast expanse of waters. The castle has not the air of ancient grandeur which some of the old seats of Scotland yet retain, and well adapted the convenience of modern life." I am sure the walls of this castle hold many secrets never to be told, for it is now left largely to nature's mercy. It isn't conventionally beautiful, but it is deeply atmospheric, even unsettling. This is what happens when a ruin is left to dream on its own. This castle endures as a monument not only to Scottish history, but also due to Gothic imagination, a place where stone, sea and story meet. Standing among the broken walls, one feels the pull of the past, the whisper of the supernatural, reminders that here, on the edge of the North Sea, the ghosts of legends are never far away. Today, Slane Castle stands in silence, a hollow shell against the endless wind and sea. Its walls are broken, its halls open to the sky, yet traces of life still linger here. Once, these corridors echoed with laughter and music, with footsteps of nobles and servants moving through candlelit rooms. Now only the wind walks through where once they stood. Still the spirits of the place endures, where history and legend meet, and the whispers of the past drift through the ruins and out over the cliffs, though time has claimed its grandeur. This castle remains alive in memory and imagination, a haunting reminder that some stories, like the sea below, never truly end. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please leave a comment and let me know your thoughts on this amazing ruined castle. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss any future videos. And you'd like to take it a step further, then consider becoming a member, where you will get the chance to watch these videos before anyone else. And until the next time, stay safe.